My wake-up call came late one spring night when our son was about 18 months old. My husband Victor and I had just fallen asleep in our one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn when Zach started wailing. I leapt out of bed instinctively, as I'd done many nights before, lifting him from the crib a few feet away from our bed and nestling him against my chest. As I paced back and forth across our bedroom, trying to rock Zach back to sleep, I gazed around, bleary-eyed, at the familiar furnishings that usually brought me comfort. The colorful curtains my mother-in-law had sewn for us, the indigo print bedspread that was starting to fray at the edges, the IKEA set of drawers now doing double duty as a diaper-changing table. But this time, as I looked around, I felt a growing sense of unease. Victor and I had lived in this apartment for 7 years now. Through our engagement, a wedding, 4 jobs between us, and now a baby. As I crisscrossed the room that night, it dawned on me that we were in a totally unsustainable situation. We were sharing our only bedroom, which also doubled as a home office for Victor, with a son who was getting close to outgrowing his crib. What would happen as he grew older? And what about that second child we'd always planned to have? That definitely was not going to happen if we were still sharing our bedroom with a toddler. I'd always imagined that we'd be in a home of our own when we started a family, not renting a one-bedroom apartment and wondering if we'd be able to afford another child. But even with 2 paychecks coming in, we seemed to be making slow progress financially, and our expenses were growing. Now we had to pay for childcare, diapers, bottles, and an ever-changing assortment of toys and clothes. We'd have to buy a toddler bed soon. And the rent for our apartment had just gone up. Here I was in my 30s, an independent-minded woman with a successful career and a steady paycheck. How had I gotten to the point where some of the things that mattered most to me were now at stake? A little voice inside my head said, "This isn't the way it was supposed to be." Confession time. When I'd imagined our future together, I'd assumed that Victor's salary would far surpass mine. But he'd been laid off a few years earlier, and it had taken him some time to find another job and regain his financial footing. I'd told myself this was a short-term setback, but his income still wasn't much higher than mine. We'd each already cut back on nights out with friends and had yet to hire a sitter to go out just the 2 of us. Before the baby, we'd had dinner out at least once a week. Now we stayed home and often ate takeout pizza or canned soup with toast after our son finally fell asleep. Although the gap in our earnings had shrunk significantly, I realized I was still clinging to the belief that Victor would be the one to get a raise or a better-paying job that would allow us to afford a bigger place. I'd been plodding along, paycheck to paycheck, happy in my job as a magazine writer, and focused on our baby. I'd mostly resisted looking more than a few months into the future. After I set Zach gently in his crib, I slipped back into bed and gazed at my husband, sound asleep and snoring softly beside me. I lay awake, my heart racing. Dozens of questions ran through my head. How much more would we need to save to have a second child? How much would we need to save to buy a home? What if Victor didn't get a better-paying job? Then, the ultimate question, one I'd never asked myself before. Was I prepared to take on the main breadwinner role in order to afford the future we wanted?